He woke up beside the woman he loved. Her back was turned to him. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap and last night's rain drifting in through a half-open window. Pale morning light crawled slowly across the ceiling, touching the edges of a life that once felt certain. For a brief, fragile moment, everything felt normal. Then she turned her head, and she looked at him the way someone looks at a stranger who has wandered into the wrong room. Her eyes didn't soften. They searched. "Who are you?" she asked, not angrily, not accusingly, just carefully, as if the wrong answer might shatter something neither of them could see. He didn't respond right away. He had learned that silence, sometimes, hurt less than truth. The woman he loved had no idea who he was. Every morning, it happened like this. Some mornings, she screamed. Some mornings, she cried. And some mornings like this one, she simply stared, trying to place him inside a mind that no longer held his name. And every morning, he lost her again. There are many ways to lose someone. Some losses come with funerals, flowers, and people whispering condolences you barely hear. But there is another kind of loss. The kind that sits up in bed beside you. The kind that breathes the same air. The kind that looks into your face every day and asks who you are. This is not a story about death. This is a story about something far more unbearable. This is a story about love that didn't end, even when memory did. About two lives bound by decades of shared moments. Christmas mornings, hospital waiting rooms, inside jokes whispered in the dark, slowly being erased from one side while the other was forced to remember everything. About devotion that wasn't rewarded with recognition. About choosing to stay, when staying meant being forgotten. This is a story about love that survived forgetting, and by the time it ends, you may find yourself asking a question you've never dared to ask before. If the person you love can no longer remember loving you, do you stay anyway? His name was Elias. Every morning, Elias woke up at exactly 6:12 a.m. Not because he needed to, but because his body no longer trusted sleep. He would lie still for a few seconds, listening. The old wooden floorboards of their terraced house in Southsea creaked softly as the heating clicked on. Somewhere down the street, a delivery van reversed with a faint electronic hum. A gull cried near the harbour. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. He turned his head slowly, bracing himself. Some mornings, she was already awake, sitting upright, hands clenched in the bedsheets, eyes wide with fear. Other mornings, she slept peacefully, her face relaxed, untouched by the chaos waiting just beneath the surface. Those were the mornings Elias treasured most, because as long as she slept, she still belonged to him. He would watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the thin silver chain resting against her collarbone, the faint scar near her left eyebrow from the day she slipped on wet tiles in the kitchen 27 years ago. He remembered everything. When she finally woke, Elias followed the same routine. He never rushed, never startled her, never spoke first. He had learned that mornings were delicate. One wrong word could turn fear into panic. Sometimes she smiled at him, a small, uncertain smile, the kind given to kind strangers. Other times, she pulled the duvet closer to her chest. "Did you come with the nurses?" she once asked. That morning, Elias simply shook his head. "I'm here with you," he said instead. Every day began this way, not with love, but with reintroduction. And as the kettle boiled downstairs and the morning light crept higher along the walls, Elias prepared himself for the 1,000th time to earn a place in her world all over again. Because in this house, memory was unreliable, but love was still fighting to stay. By 6:40 a.m., the kettle was always on. Elias stood in the narrow kitchen, barefoot on cold tiles, watching steam curl toward the ceiling like something trying to escape. 2 mugs sat on the counter, one chipped at the rim, the other stained permanently with tea marks that never quite scrubbed away. He poured the water slowly. Upstairs the bed creaked. That sound alone could tell him what kind of morning it would be. Some mornings, fear arrived first. She would sit upright, heart racing, eyes darting around the room like she had woken up in a hotel she didn't remember booking. Her fingers clawed at the duvet, knuckles pale, breath shallow. "Please don't come closer," she once whispered, backing away as far as the headboard allowed. Elias had frozen. He learned not to flinch. He learned that even kindness, if delivered too quickly, could feel like a threat. On those mornings he stayed near the door. He spoke softly. He told her where she was without telling her why. "You're safe," he said. "It's Tuesday. It's Portsmouth. You can hear the sea if you listen." Sometimes she believed him. Sometimes she didn't. Other mornings were quieter, polite mornings. She would look at him with mild embarrassment, adjusting the sleeves of her pajamas, offering a smile that felt borrowed. "I'm sorry," she'd say. "I should know who you are, shouldn't I?" Elias would nod, just once. "Take your time." She always did. And then there were the mornings that hurt the most, the curious ones. She would study his face the way someone examines an old photograph found in a drawer, familiar but stripped of context. "You look important," she said once, tilting her head, "like someone I used to trust." Those mornings, Elias had to grip the kitchen counter to steady himself. Because love, once, had been effortless. Now, love became a reintroduction. Every single day. Breakfast followed the same pattern: toast, jam. A slice of pear peeled because she no longer liked the skin. The radio murmured softly in the background, BBC Radio Solent, the same station they'd listened to for years. Sometimes she hummed along to songs she didn't recognize. Sometimes she asked if the house belonged to her parents. Sometimes she asked if he was married. Some losses happen daily, and Elias learned that grief didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived quietly, holding a mug of tea. At first, Elias corrected her. When she called him Sir, he said his name. When she asked if he was a neighbour, he explained. When she wondered aloud why she felt calm around him, he told her the truth. "I'm your husband." The word used to mean everything. Now it landed like a stone dropped into water, too heavy, too sudden, sending ripples of confusion across her face. "Married?" she asked once, panic flashing in her eyes. "But I don't remember a wedding." Elias tried to laugh it off. He tried to show her photos. He tried to explain. That was the day she cried for 2 hours straight, apologizing over and over for something she couldn't fix. That was the day he stopped. He stopped saying "my wife." He stopped correcting dates, names, shared memories. He stopped pointing to the ring still on her finger, because every correction felt like forcing open a door her mind had locked for a reason. So he changed his language. "I'm Elias," he said instead. "I make the tea. I live here. I'm not going anywhere." And slowly, something strange began to happen. Without the pressure of truth, she softened. She asked him questions. How long had he lived in the house? Why did the spare room smell like old books? Why did she feel sad when she looked at the garden? He let her rediscover him, not as a husband, but as a presence, as someone familiar enough to trust. Some afternoons they sat on the sofa watching reruns of Antiques Roadshow. She leaned closer without realizing it. Her shoulder brushed his arm. Elias never moved, because in that moment, love wasn't loud. It was quiet permission. It was patience. It was choosing silence over being right. One morning, as Elias rinsed the mugs at the sink, she stood behind him, watching the way his shoulders moved familiar, though she didn't know why. "You haven't told me something," she said. Elias turned. "What haven't I told you?" "My name," she replied. The word name hung between them longer than it should have. Elias hesitated, because names had weight, and once spoken, they could be lost again. Still, he answered. It's Mara. She repeated it quietly, testing the sound. Mara? Something flickered across her face. Not recognition, not memory, but emotion. I don't know why, she said slowly, but that name feels important. Elias nodded. It is. From that day on, he used it carefully, not too often, not like before, just enough to remind her she existed beyond confusion. Mara, your tea's ready. Mara, it's going to rain later. Mara, you're safe. Some days she said it herself. Other days she didn't. And Elias learned something terrifying. Even when she forgot who he was, she sometimes forgot who she was too. There is a kind of love that asks to be remembered. And then there is a kind of love that stays, even when it isn't. Have you ever loved someone who didn't remember loving you back? The first time Elias noticed it, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind, just a steady Portsmouth drizzle, the kind that darkened pavements and soaked into coats slowly, without urgency. They were standing at the pedestrian crossing on Albert Road, waiting for the light to change. Cars hissed past, tires slicing through water, a bus idled nearby, engine vibrating through the ground. Mara stood slightly apart from him, her gaze unfocused, lips pressed together. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. Elias said her name once, softly, Mara. She flinched at the sound of traffic behind her. Before she could step back, before fear could decide for her, her hand reached out. Not carefully, not hesitantly. Her fingers wrapped around his sleeve with quiet certainty. She didn't look at him. She didn't ask who he was. She just held on. And something in Elias stopped working properly because she hadn't remembered him. She had found him. Her hands remembered what her mind forgot. From that day on, he noticed it everywhere. When they sat in the GP's waiting room on Goldsmith Avenue, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, outdated posters peeling from the walls, Mara grew restless. The hum of fluorescent lights made her uneasy. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. He cleared his throat once, and Mara leaned toward the sound. Her shoulder pressed against his arm. Her breathing slowed. The nurse called her name, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. But Mara didn't move until Elias stood first. Love moved deeper than thought. At night, when memory loosened its grip even further, it happened again. Mara would wake suddenly, disoriented, her pulse racing. She didn't scream anymore. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached across the bed. Her hand searched the dark with quiet urgency. Elias always caught it. And the moment he did, her body softened. Muscles unclenched. Breath steadied. She didn't know why his touch calmed her, but it did. Once half asleep, she murmured something that stayed with him for days. "Don't go," she said. Elias didn't answer. He just held her hand tighter. Elias was 58, but strangers often guessed older. It wasn't the grey in his hair that had come early and gracefully. It was the way he moved, carefully, deliberately. As if his body was rationing energy, it didn't trust itself to replenish. In the bathroom mirror each morning, he barely recognized himself anymore. Dark shadows lived beneath his eyes now. His shoulders sloped forward slightly, like a man carrying something invisible, but heavy. He never spoke about it. Not to Mara, not to the doctors, not even to himself. Loneliness, he discovered, didn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it came from being the only one who remembered. He remembered the first flat they rented near Palmerston Road, with the stubborn boiler that only worked if you knocked it twice. He remembered Mara dancing in the kitchen, barefoot, to a song playing from her phone, laughing when he joined in badly. He remembered the night she told him she was pregnant, the night they lost that child, the way they held each other in silence because words felt insulting to the pain. Mara remembered none of it, and Elias carried those memories alone now. Some evenings, after Mara had fallen asleep on the sofa, Her head tilted at an awkward angle, glasses slipping down her nose. Elias stayed awake long after the television shut itself off. The house felt enormous then. Every sound echoed. The ticking clock in the hallway, the distant foghorn from the harbour, the refrigerator humming steadily as if nothing in the world had changed. He sat there unmoving, because if he closed his eyes too long, he feared he might not have the strength to open them again. Yet every morning at 6:12 a.m. he did. He rose. He made the tea. He waited. No complaints, because love, he had learned, wasn't measured by how much you were given back. It was measured by how much you were willing to give, even when no one noticed. It happened on a Thursday, late April, the kind of morning Portsmouth rarely gets. Clear sky, pale sunlight, the sea calm enough to look forgiving. Elias noticed something was different before she even spoke. Mara didn't ask where she was. She didn't sit up abruptly or scan the room with quiet alarm. Instead, she lay still, blinking slowly, as if adjusting to light she hadn't seen in a long time. Then she frowned, not in confusion, in concentration. "Why is the alarm still set for 6?" she asked. Elias froze. His hand hovered mid-air above the kettle downstairs, his breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. "You always forget to turn it off," she continued, her voice steady. "I told you years ago after you retired that we didn't need it anymore." Years ago. Elias turned slowly. Mara was sitting up now, pushing her hair back from her face in a way she hadn't done in months. Her eyes were clear, focused, annoyed, the way she used to look at him. "You're staring," she said. "What's wrong with you?" Elias didn't answer. He walked toward her carefully, like someone approaching something fragile that might vanish if touched. "Mara," he said. She rolled her eyes. "Yes, Elias. That's my name." The room tilted. She looked down at her hands, then at the thin gold ring on her finger. "Oh, God," she whispered. "I've been having those dreams again, haven't I?" Dreams. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, steady on her feet. "I hate those," she said. "Everything feels foggy, like I've misplaced weeks." Weeks. Elias felt something crack open in his chest. Downstairs, they sat at the kitchen table, same chipped mug, same stained counter, and for the first time in months, Mara spoke without hesitation. She talked about their wedding at St. Jude's Church in Southsea, about the rain that soaked his suit trousers as they ran for the car, about the argument they'd had on their 10th anniversary because he forgot to book the restaurant. She laughed, a real laugh, not the polite one, not the borrowed one, the laugh that used to fill rooms. "You remember the caravan in Cornwall," she said, "the one with the broken door? You said it had character." Elias laughed too. For the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt. This felt like the turning point, the kind people pray for. They didn't waste the day. Mara insisted on going out. They walked along the seafront, past South Parade Pier, the wind tugging at her coat. She complained about the cold, exactly the way she always had. At a cafe near Canoe Lake, she ordered lemon cake without looking at the menu. "You always get that," Elias said. "I know," she replied. "You think it's boring." "I never said that. You didn't have to." That night, they stayed awake. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both understood the same thing. Sleep was a risk. They sat on the bed, backs against the headboard, talking softly while the house settled around them. Mara asked questions, careful ones. "How long have I been forgetting?" "What did the doctor say? Did I scare you?" Elias answered honestly but gently. He didn't tell her everything. Some truths felt too heavy for a borrowed miracle. At one point she reached for his hand. Her grip was firm, certain. "If this doesn't last," she said quietly, "promise me something." Elias swallowed. "Anything." "Promise me you didn't waste this time being sad." He nodded. "I didn't." She rested her head on his shoulder, just like she used to. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. They were afraid morning would steal her again, so they stayed awake, talking, remembering, holding on to something neither of them could control. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, Mara was still there, still herself. Elias closed his eyes for just a moment, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe maybe this was the beginning of getting her back. Morning did not arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself with panic or chaos. It came the way it always did, softly, through the thin curtains, touching the edges of the room like it had done for decades. Elias woke first. His body had barely rested. He had drifted in and out of shallow sleep, afraid that closing his eyes for too long might tempt fate. For a moment, just a moment, everything was still. Mara lay beside him, facing the window. Her breathing was slow, even, peaceful. Hope crept in before he could stop it. Then she moved. She turned toward him, squinting slightly as the morning light reached her face. Her brow furrowed, her eyes narrowed, not in recognition, but in alarm. She pulled the duvet closer to her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "Who are you?" The words landed without force, no anger, no accusation, just fear. Elias didn't move. The clock on the bedside table ticked loudly now. Each second felt exposed. No music, no sound but breath and ticking and the distant gulls outside. 10 seconds passed, then 15. Mara's gaze darted to the door, then back to him. "I don't know how I got here," she said. "I think you've made a mistake." Elias felt something inside him settle. Not break, settle. Because this time, the loss didn't surprise him. It confirmed what he had already begun to understand. The miracle had been borrowed, and it had expired. In the past, Elias would have rushed. He would have reached for photographs, explained timelines, spoken names like evidence. But this morning was different. He stayed where he was. He let the silence breathe. "Mara," he said gently. She flinched. "How do you know my name?" Elias exhaled slowly. "I know a lot of things about you," he said, "but you don't have to worry about that right now." She studied him, uncertain. "Are you a doctor?" "No." "A neighbor?" "No." She hesitated. "Then who are you?" Elias met her eyes, not with desperation, not with pleading, but with a calm he had earned. "I'm someone who loves you," he said. The sentence did something to the room. Mara's shoulders lowered slightly. Her breathing slowed. She didn't understand the words, but her body did. "I don't feel like you're lying," she said quietly. "I'm not." She looked down at her hands, turned them over slowly. "My head feels empty," she whispered, "like a house after everyone's left." Elias nodded. "That happens." She glanced at him again. "Does it happen often?" "Yes." "Does it scare me?" "Sometimes." She swallowed. "Does it scare you?" Elias paused. "Yes," he said, "but I know how to handle it now." Mara stared at him for a long moment. Then, without knowing why, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his wrist. Not urgently, not desperately, just enough to test something invisible. Her hand stayed there, and Elias understood fully, for the first time. Memory was no longer the point. Recognition was no longer required. Love did not live in facts or names or shared timelines. It lived in calm, in safety, in the quiet decision to stay, even when the story had to be told again. Some people are loved because they are remembered. Others are remembered because they are loved. And Elias knew which one he was now. The first thing to change was the light. In May, sunlight lingered in the house until nearly 9 in the evening, pouring through the living room windows and resting on the faded armchair by the radiator, the one Mara used to sit in with her legs tucked beneath her, reading novels she could no longer follow past the first chapter. By June, the light stayed longer, but Mara stayed awake less. Elias noticed it in small ways. She stopped asking about the garden. The roses he pruned every Sunday morning bloomed without comment. The lavender by the fence grew wild, untrimmed, its scent drifting through open windows unnoticed. Some days, Mara barely spoke. She sat by the window, staring past the glass, as if watching something Elias couldn't see. Her reflection stared back at her, unfamiliar, older. "What are you looking at?" Elias asked once. "I'm not sure," she replied, "but it feels important." Summer passed quietly. The house grew heavier with silence. By autumn, the evenings arrived earlier. Elias closed curtains sooner, turned lamps on before dusk settled completely. Leaves gathered in the corners of the street outside, pressed against the pavement by wind and rain. Mara no longer recognized the street. She asked if they were visiting someone. "No," Elias said. "We live here." "Oh," she replied, unconcerned. "It's nice." Some days she remembered fragments. A song on the radio made her cry without explanation. The smell of oranges reminded her of Christmas mornings she couldn't place. She asked about a man who used to make her laugh. Elias answered carefully. "That was me." She smiled politely. "I'm glad you're kind to him." Clear days came less often now. When they did, they were brief, fleeting, like sunlight breaking through clouds only to disappear again moments later. Winter arrived without ceremony. Frost traced the windows in the mornings. Elias pulled Mara's coat tighter around her when they walked, though she no longer noticed the cold. The armchair remained empty more often. The sunset slowed. And time, once measured in days, began to move in silences. It happened in February. No special date, no anniversary, just an ordinary afternoon. The sky outside was low and grey, the sea invisible beyond a curtain of mist. Elias sat beside Mara's bed, reading aloud from a book she had once loved. He didn't expect her to follow the story. He read because the sound of his voice still reached her. Halfway through a paragraph, Mara stirred. She turned her head slowly toward him, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Elias," she said. He stopped reading. "Yes?" She frowned slightly, as if concentrating through pain. "I don't remember everything," she said, "but I remember how you make me feel." Elias leaned forward. "How's that?" "Safe," she replied, "like I've been looked after for a very long time." Her hand trembled as she lifted it. Elias took it immediately, wrapping both of his around hers. "I think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I loved you very much." The room seemed to shrink around them. Elias swallowed. "You did," he said softly. She blinked, tears forming without explanation. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I wish I could remember it properly." Elias smiled. A real smile. The kind that didn't need recognition. "That's all right," he said. "I remembered for both of us." Mara exhaled slowly. Her grip loosened. The clarity faded as gently as it had come, leaving behind quiet, comfortable confusion. But Elias stayed. He always did. Because love, in the end, was not about being known. It was about knowing and choosing, again and again, to remain. The house did not change when Mara died. That was the cruelest part. The kettle still clicked off too early. The clock in the hallway still lost 2 minutes every day. The floorboard outside the bedroom still creaked in the same place. But everything else felt wrong. Elias stood in the doorway of the bedroom long after the nurse had left, long after the final paperwork had been signed, long after the word "gone" had been spoken softly and carefully, as if volume could make it hurt less. The bed was neatly made, too neatly. Her cardigan hung on the back of the chair, one sleeve folded inward like an arm that would never be used again. On the windowsill sat the small ceramic bird she bought years ago from a charity shop on Elm Grove because it looked lonely. Elias didn't move it. He walked through the house slowly, as if sound might wake her. In the kitchen, 2 mugs still sat by the sink, one chipped, one stained. He reached for the chipped one by instinct, then stopped. There was no one left to give the other two. That night, he slept on his side of the bed. Out of habit, in the days that followed, people came and went. Neighbours from the street, a cousin from Bristol, old friends who hugged him too tightly, spoke too quietly, and told him how strong he was. They left casseroles, cards, well-meaning advice about time, but time did not fill the silence. It only stretched it. Elias noticed the absence everywhere, in the armchair that never warmed anymore, in the quiet mornings when no one asked where they were, in the way the house no longer needed explaining. Love, he realized, does not disappear when someone does. It echoes. Months later, Elias walked along the seafront alone, the same path, the same wind, the same sound of waves striking stone. A couple passed him, arguing softly about directions. A child laughed somewhere behind him. Life continued, indifferent and exact. Elias stopped near the railings and looked out at the water. For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly, more to himself than anyone else, he spoke. Maybe love isn't about being remembered. Maybe it's about staying. About showing up when recognition fades. About choosing patience over proof. About carrying the story when someone else no longer can. Mara had forgotten his name, but she had never forgotten how he made her feel. And in the end, that was enough. Some stories don't ask to be understood. They ask to be felt. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you lost, or someone you stayed for when it was hard, like, subscribe and share this story so others can find it too. Thank you for being here.